After many years, we crossed paths again. I was holding my son, and he was with his girlfriend. When someone mentioned his ex, he scoffed. I paid for her to go to school for 4 years, and after graduation, she left me for someone richer. Somebody joked, Luke's ex must be regretting it so much. He glanced at me, Mrs. Eric, do you think she'd regret it? I swallowed my sadness and replied, no, she wouldn't. He sneered, well, I regret it. I regret taking in that stray cat. When we were 18, Luke took me in from the streets. He supported my education, and loved me with all his heart. We agreed to marry after graduation, but after I graduated, I left him for someone wealthier. 5 years later, he was at an auction with a stunning girlfriend, ready to spend lavishly. 3 million, 3.5 million, 4 million. Luke seemed to be in a bidding war with Eric. Every time Eric bid, Luke followed. The guests were watching intently. Luke confidently raised his paddle, bidding 5 million. The room was filled with gasps. Eric hesitated, trying to bid again, but I stopped him. Let it go, Eric. He tilted his head slightly and asked softly, you don't like it? I shook my head. 5 million once, 5 million twice, 5 million thrice. Sold. The Qing Dynasty Golden Phoenix hairpin sold for $5 million to Luke. The room buzzed with chatter, claiming the president of W Group spent a fortune out of love. Back then, when we were together and struggling financially, he bought me a magnolia hairpin for $500. It was too expensive. He worked so hard to earn money. I cried and asked him to return it. He just ruffled my hair and said, I'll get you something more expensive in the future. At least 5 million worth for my Linda. Now, he truly spent 5 million on a hairpin. But things have changed. After the auction, people gathered around Luke. Some tried to get close, and others wanted to take photos with his girlfriend. His girlfriend was famous, the up-and-coming star Wendy. As I held Tim's hand and walked alongside Eric, we ran into Luke. Wearing a high-end suit, he looked dignified and distant, a look I'd never seen before. His girlfriend, beaming, was dazzling by his side. Thanks for letting it go for today, Eric. Luke stopped to greet Eric, but his gaze lingered on me. Back then, when he looked at me, his eyes had a unique tenderness. Now, they were cold and unfamiliar. Our eyes met briefly. My heart gave a little jump, and I tightened my grip on Tim's hand. Luke is just being polite. The highest bid wins. Eric responded with a warm smile and shook Luke's hand. This is my wife, Linda, and this is our son, Eric. Luke's eyes flickered and finally fell on my hand holding Tim's. He paused and then chuckled mysteriously. Eric, you're lucky. Eric smiled, not as lucky as Luke. Wendy's even prettier in person than on camera. Wendy blushed, showing a joyful smile, and hugged Luke's arm even tighter. Eric joked, Luke's lavish spending to make his beauty smile will surely be a great story. Everyone nodded, admiring the handsome couple. But Luke's assistant suddenly laughed inappropriately. What do you call this? Luke's devotion to his ex-girlfriend was something else. After years apart, I almost didn't recognize Charles, the once wild-haired, red-headed man. Now in a suit with neat black hair, he looked like a business elite. He glanced at me, openly mocking. It's a shame some people are blind to greatness. People started whispering. Who knew Luke had an ex-girlfriend? Luke shook his head and laughed lightly. No need to mention her. His cold gaze seemed to hold a hint of sarcasm. Paid for her schooling for 4 years, and after graduation, she left me for someone with money. Beside him, Wendy teased, Charles, why didn't you tell me about this? The girl who made Luke so love-struck must have been beautiful, right? Charles sneered, his mocking gaze on me, his voice playful. You know, Linda looks a lot like my former sister-in-law. He emphasized the former with disdain. Wouldn't she regret it if she knew how successful my brother is now? I lowered my eyes, avoiding his gaze. But Charles kept pushing. Is Linda a stepmother? They say stepmothers have it tough, but she seems at ease. Everyone turned to look at me, and there were whispered speculations. I felt increasingly embarrassed, my head lowering as much as possible. Embarrassed to the extreme. Tim suddenly broke free, and bit Charles's arm. Charles winced and frowned, but couldn't retaliate. Eric stepped up to pull Tim away. Sorry, Tim is a bit rebellious. He picked Tim up, polite but distant. I don't think I've wronged Luke. Why is his assistant mocking and embarrassing my husband publicly? Luke frowned, adjusting his tie, his gaze landing on me again. Sorry, maybe Mrs. Eric resembles my ex-girlfriend too much. He turned and instructed Charles. Charles apologized to Eric's wife. Charles, hands in pockets, barely lifted his eyes. Apologies, Mrs. Linda, hope you don't mind. His lazy tone was not genuine. It was mocking, coming from us street punks. You know, we lack culture and class. Charles's words felt like a needle piercing my heart, a dull pain. 5 years ago, I told Luke, you're just a poor, uncouth punk. You don't deserve me. Now, he's emerged as a rising industry star with a flourishing career and a beauty at his side. Like a resounding slap in my face, my hand clenched tightly under my sleeve, trembling slightly. Just when I was feeling utterly uncomfortable, Tim ran over and held my hand. Mom, bathroom. Okay, Mommy will take you. I took Tim's hand and left, escaping the scene. Leaning against the wall outside the restroom, I exhaled wearily, my whole body shaking. Luke. Even now, I couldn't believe that this unexpected encounter, after years apart, was real. I heard footsteps coming from down the hallway. I looked up suddenly. The face, outlined against the light, was coming closer, step by step. His deep-set eyes and striking features had my heart racing. It felt like something hit me hard in the chest, making it difficult to breathe. I didn't dare look up at him. All I wanted was to flee. Panicked, I turned to leave when a deep voice called from behind, Linda. My hands clenched tighter and tighter, trembling. Why the rush? He stepped in front of me, casting a shadow. He'd taken off his suit jacket. Only a black shirt remained, partly unbuttoned with a loose tie hanging around his neck. The familiar scent was there, but his expression was foreign. Luke, long time no see. I tried to suppress my panic. The words felt shaky coming out. He looked at me, his eyes a stormy, silent but turbulent ocean. After a long pause, his Adam's apple bobbed twice. Don't you think you owe me an explanation for what happened back then? His tight-lipped reply, combined with the tension in his jaw, sent waves of unease through me. I had seen so many sides of him, but this moment felt both familiar and strange, unlike the Luke I remembered. After a long silence, I could only whisper, I'm sorry. He let out a mocking laugh. 5 years, and that's all I get. He suddenly stepped closer, and I backed away in a panic until I hit the cold wall behind me. Linda, I'm loaded now, he stated, his voice clear yet his expression forlorn. He trapped me in the corner. His breathing was heavy beside my ear. I pressed myself against the wall, too afraid to meet his eyes. Luke, I'm married. His breath grew heavier. Lifting my chin abruptly, he stared at me. Regret it, Linda? I was forced to look at him, his eyes slightly red, burning with intensity. I clenched my fists, holding back the sting in my chest. No regrets. He suddenly chuckled, his hand moving to my neck with light pressure that made breathing difficult. Linda, you're something. His red-tinged eyes pinned me, cold and sharp like knives. But I regret it. Picking up that stray cat. By stray cat, he meant me. 10 years ago, I was shivering on a hospital bench. He sat beside me, banged up, with tattoos peeking from his sleeves. I scooted away in fright. Scared of me? He asked, glancing sideways. I clutched my legs, avoiding his gaze and staying silent. You're handsome, not scary. I peeked a glance. His face was bruised, head wrapped in a crooked bandage. Not exactly handsome. I frowned and shook my head. He looked confused. Headshake means not handsome or not scary. I didn't answer. He moved in front of me, eyeing me with curiosity. Whose kid are you? Here alone. Ran away after a fight. I stayed quiet, and he frowned, mute. He pulled out his phone to call the cops, which panicked me. Grabbing his clothes, I pleaded, don't, I can speak. Right, joke's on me. Where do you live? He asked. I don't have a home, I whispered. Not scared of freezing here. None of your business. I was wary of him. He was clearly a delinquent. Not like I want to meddle. He glanced at me and walked away. As relief washed over me, he returned abruptly. Either the police station or with me, your choice, he said, grabbing my backpack. I was startled and tried to snatch it back, but he was tall and lifted it out of reach. Give it back, I said, almost in tears. Do I look like a bad guy? He grimaced before I kept silent. Just temporarily less handsome now. Once healed, I'll be back to being handsome. He looked me over disdainfully. Kid, I have standards. Go with me or the cops. Choose. I was too nervous to speak. He counted down. 3, 2. No, not the police. I blurted, clutching his clothes in panic. He chuckled, taking my hand and pulling me along with my bag. Outside, a red-haired guy was shocked. Whoa. Went for a checkup. Came back with a cute girl. He surveyed me, teasing. She looks young. This your type? Luke shot him an annoyed look. Found her. Years later, while cuddling with him, I asked why he took me in. He said I had this wary look like a little lost kitten, wet-eyed, that tugged at his protective instincts. He often joked about finding a wife that day. With a thumping heart, I followed him upstairs to an old complex. The hallway had just one flickering bulb. In the dim light, I almost missed a step, but he caught my shoulder. The pounding in my chest only grew stronger. I wondered why I followed a stranger home. Images of crimes against young girls flashed in my mind. Standing at the doorway, I refused to enter. He eyed me impatiently, like standing in the doorway. Stepping into the living room, he threw my bag on the couch and reclined, covering himself with a black coat, then closed his eyes. With a side note, he said, forgot to mention, this building is haunted, screams at night. I glanced at the dark hall, chilled to the bone. Too scared to think straight, I shivered. Inside, he sighed, either sleep in the bedroom or close the door. With that, he cocooned his head under the coat. The night was eerily silent, only the wind and my heart beating loudly. Glimpsing at him on the sofa, he seemed asleep already. Exhausted and cold, I tiptoed to the bedroom. Compared to the stiff hospital chair, the bed was heavenly. I fell asleep quickly. The next morning, when I woke up, I realized he was gone. I secretly breathed a sigh of relief, grabbed my backpack, and ran out. His place is super close to the school. As I sprinted there, I noticed my backpack's zipper was wide open, and just like that, my Chinese textbook was missing. I retraced my steps, but had no luck finding it. My last hope was it might still be on that couch from yesterday, but thinking about how scary he looked, I didn't dare go back. We're not really from the same world anyways, so it seemed like our paths wouldn't cross again. A few days later, someone stood at the back of the classroom calling my name. I turned my head and saw a guy leaning casually against the doorway. He was in a black puffer jacket, with his hands in his pockets. Tall, narrow-eyed, with thin lips, he looked laid back, but carried a wild streak. I thought I had the wrong person. I didn't know him, so I glanced back and turned away. Hey Luke, what brings you here? One of the guys in my class asked. Looking for someone. Linda, he replied impatiently. He called my name again. His voice was familiar, but not the face. Linda, Luke's looking for you. A boy called out loudly, and suddenly, the whole class was looking at me. With everyone watching, I slowly walked up to him. Hi, did you need something from me? I asked nervously. He huffed, placed a book on my head, and then walked off. Dazed, I took the book and realized it was my textbook. So it was him all along. He looked so different from that bruised up appearance the other day. In this light, he definitely had some good looks going on. Curious classmates gathered around me. Hey Linda, how do you know Luke? Is he really Luke? Even though I hadn't been at the school for long, his name wasn't unfamiliar. A guy loads of girls had crushes on, and apparently the king of the troublemaking science kids upstairs. Lived for the thrill of a fight. But thinking back, he didn't seem as terrible as the rumors made him out to be. That afternoon, to my surprise, my mom came to pick me up from school. My mom didn't really like me. Truth be told, she probably hated me. She was a beauty who relied on men her whole life, and I was just her ball and chain. Her latest husband, Howard, was rich, looked like a nice guy, polite, and for some reason, he didn't dislike me. Even laughed, bought me pretty clothes. I thought maybe, finally, I wouldn't need to move around all the time. But then, I started noticing Howard's touchy way around me. Once, while I was showering, he used a key to open the bathroom door. That day, I was terrified. I had nowhere to go. Ended up wandering in a hospital corridor. That was the day I ran into Luke. Mom, is Uncle Eric still on a business trip? I asked cautiously. He just got back. Thought I'd pick you up, and we could all have dinner together. I don't want to go. Let me out of the car. Fear flooded over me. What are you acting up for? Eric just had a little too much to drink that day and accidentally walked in. Not a big deal. My mom glared at me, annoyed. Linda, I've worked hard to snag a wealthy man. Don't mess this up for us. Angering Howard will do no good for either of us. Howard bought me another pretty dress that night, explained away the misunderstanding at dinner, but I was still scared. The bed at the mansion was soft, but I couldn't fall asleep. Until one night, around 2 a.m., I heard the bedroom door unlock. Howard was standing behind me in silence. In panic, I called the cops and showed them footage from the camera I had secretly installed in my room, hoping Mom would finally believe I wasn't lying. But they said the footage proved nothing. Mom, meanwhile, was busy apologizing, claiming it was just a family affair, teenage rebellion, a little family fight. Howard's a well-known businessman. The cops left with far too much respect. Mom slapped me, called me cheap, accused me of seducing men, and that I'd ruined her life. Told me to get out, said I was no daughter of hers. I didn't know what I did wrong to make her hate me so much. Why have me, then? With nowhere to go, I wandered the streets. Behind the school, a few stray cats huddled in a worn-out box. Someone crouched down, opened a pack of sausages, and fed them piece by piece. Our eyes met. Surprisingly, it was Luke. Luke, he fed the last piece to the kitten and patted its head. What's up? He stood and walked up to me, my eyes fixed on the ground. Linda, when I didn't respond, he nudged my shoe with his. See, can I crash at your place? I whispered, looking up slowly. Our eyes met, and he seemed a bit taken aback. What, my place a hotel or something? Sleep and run. He gave me a once-over, sounding annoyed. Weren't you totally against it the other day? I thought you weren't that bad, I mumbled. He snickered a bit. Maybe because he fed the stray cat sausage. I figured underneath that tough look, he might actually be soft-hearted. My mom kicked me out. Could you, let me stay with you for a while? Why should I? He countered. I'll cook, clean, and do laundry for you. Plus, I don't eat much. I pleaded with him, hoping he'd be kind enough to help me out. Staying alone freaked me out, and I didn't have enough money to make it work. He ground his teeth a bit, obviously irritated, turned and walked off. But just as I was about to give up, he glanced back at me, frowning, and said, well, you coming? When he saw the charcoal-like pancakes I made, he cracked a walnut, and seemed to regret his decision. Linda, this is your idea of cooking. You trying to kill me here? This is what you call taking care of me? He interrogated, pretty fired up. I'll learn, I promise, I said quietly. He just huffed, and went to make us some ramen. Though he was annoyed, he later brought a folding bed for the room. He even hung a curtain between our two beds. Those nights, I finally felt free from fear and could sleep peacefully. The sound of his breathing from the other side of the curtain somehow gave me comfort. I spent a lot of time studying for the college entrance exams, while he often played video games in the living room, with a cig hanging from his lips. It was like there was an invisible line between our worlds. But over time, our relationship wasn't as tense as it used to be. He always looked tough and threatened to kick me out, but each time he would grumpily cook a meal for two. I reminded him smoking was bad for his health, and he casually replied, life and death are fate, wealth is in the heavens. I read aloud from my phone, long-term smoking causes cardiovascular damage, throat cancer, lung cancer. But he just kept puffing away like it didn't matter. It can also cause infertility issues and abnormal sperm, I added. He cursed under his breath and put out his cigarette. Before bed, we heard a sudden scream from upstairs, and I pulled the blanket tight around me, scared. I remembered Luke mentioned their building was haunted, with weird noises at night. Shaking, I asked, Luke, are you awake? What? He answered, his voice muffled with sleep. Did you hear that creepy noise upstairs? Is your place really haunted? I was freaking out. He turned over and didn't answer me. Those strange noises continued, and I suddenly realized what they were. Blushing, I hid under the covers but couldn't sleep. Luke got up to use the bathroom 3 times, which worried me. Luke, are you feeling okay? Should I take you to the hospital? He gritted his teeth. No need. You should stop smoking. It's really bad for you. I tried to be kind. He snapped back angrily. Linda, if you don't sleep, I'll toss you out. He was always grumpy, but I knew he wouldn't kick me out. That night, for some reason, neither of us could sleep. Separated by that curtain, we talked a lot. I asked him why he lived alone, and he said his parents divorced when he was a kid. His dad died in a truck accident 2 years ago, leaving only him. He asked why I cried that day, and why I had a slap mark on my face. I told him my mom found a stepdad, and they didn't like me. She abandoned me. I was too ashamed to tell him about the stepdad, feeling it was disgraceful, because I was young. He said, if they don't want you, I'll take you in. After all, you're easy to take care of and don't eat much. I asked, Luke, are you going to college? I knew he didn't do well in school, and even if he applied, he'd just get into an average school. He said he wasn't cut out for studying, just wanted to save up and get married after graduating. I was silent for a long time and said, Luke, I want to go to school far away. I don't like this place. I feared running into Howard again one day. He was quiet for a long time before agreeing, that's great. Finally no one to bug me. I thought, maybe our story will end after the college entrance exams. He was like a light to me, but I couldn't hold on to him. I, like a stray cat, was destined to wander alone. But stories never turn out like you expect. I didn't see the ending coming, or that one day, he'd grab my throat with red-rimmed eyes, asking if I regretted it. I forced back tears, said no, but he admitted he regretted it. He stared at me intensely, as if trying to consume me. It wasn't until Tim punched and kicked him, yelling, let my mom go, bad guy, that he weakly released me. He stared, saying, Linda, it's not over between us. I didn't think much of his words until 3 days later, when a large shipment from Eric's company got seized at a port. They cited smuggling and inspected everything, burning through fines with the delivery date looming. but they wouldn't release the goods. I went to Luke's company, the tallest office building in the city, with a blazing W Group logo glinting in the sun. The secretary told me politely yet distantly that Luke was too busy to see me. No problem, I'll wait until he's free. I waited a whole 5 hours in the lounge before his girlfriend, Wendy, came out of his office, beaming as she took his arm. I swallowed my pride, lowering myself. Luke, do you have time now? He casually glanced at his watch, chuckled. Only 5 hours, Linda. Have you tried waiting 5 years for someone? I forced down the shame, my voice humble to the extreme. Luke, it was all my fault back then, but Eric is innocent. Please, show mercy to him. Shaking his head, he smirked sarcastically. Innocent? You're Mrs. Linda now. Isn't Eric your husband? Luke, what do you want? Anything I can do. Barely containing my embarrassment, I asked him. He smirked with a mysterious look. What if I want you to divorce? His gaze was penetrating, as if he could see right through me. Seeing my silent struggle, he scoffed, about to walk away. Luke, I quickly stopped him. I can divorce. Eric and I were never really husband and wife. He helped me a lot over the years. I don't want to cause him trouble. Luke's eyes flickered with emotions I couldn't decipher. Remember Garden Street 52, Linda? Meet me there tonight. Garden Street 52, the address of the house he planned for our wedding. Walking down the familiar road made my heart ache. The door code was my birthday. Inside, the 85 SQM apartment had transformed from a shabby shell into a cozy home. Standing there, memories of our conversations replayed like a movie in my mind. Luke, I like the simple modern Nordic style. Let's fill the balcony with flowers. I want a big bookshelf here. A photo wall here. How about a rocking chair here? He had held me tight, agreeing enthusiastically, saying we'd get a bigger house someday. Now, standing in this place, our dream home had become a reality. Bookshelf, flowers, rocking chair, cozy decor. The photo wall behind the sofa had our photos, from ages 18 to 22. I touched each photo, uncontrollably sobbing. The flood of memories from those years overwhelmed me. On the day the college exams ended, I had a rare drink, finishing a beer. Face red, feeling hot. We sat by that river near school, watching the sunset and a sky full of colors. I, feeling dizzy and braver, asked, Luke, Charles said you sing really well. Can you sing a song for me? That day, he was uncharacteristically gentle, like the breeze of that day. I loved the scene at that moment. Just like the feelings on that day. I kept a secret I didn't dare to show. I tilted my head, looking at him. The evening breeze carried the scent of locust trees, and the sunset made my cheeks even redder. He turned his head, and our eyes met. He reached out, pulled me into his embrace, and kissed me. The summer breeze was slightly cool, but it couldn't blow away the heat on my face. I held his clothes tightly, just staring at him. Suddenly, I couldn't hold back my tears. He smiled and gently wiped away my tears. Choking up, I asked him, Luke, are you here to save me? He said, Linda, you came to save me. That day, he held my hand, fingers intertwined, as we walked home. I hesitated for a long time and then asked, Luke, can you handle a long-distance relationship? I got into a college out of town, and his home was here, which was miles apart. He answered without hesitation, no. Just when I thought our relationship would fade away with the June winds, he booked tickets for 3 people, the 2 of us and Charles, the little redhead who was always with him. Linda, I kinda like your college town. The air is nice, and it's by the sea. Anyway, I'm just tagging along with my brother. At that moment, a swirl of emotions hit me, and I couldn't help but cry again as I looked at him. I was always the one people didn't want, never felt a father's love, and never knew a mother's care. I grew up hiding in my shell, and never thought someone would go all out for me. Luke, I'm not worth it for you. He patted my head and said, if I say you are, then you are. Charles watched the whole scene with interest and said, Linda, you can't waste my brother's romantic heart. Then he thought for a while and found a pen and paper. No way. You have to write a guarantee letter. You'll marry my brother after graduation. In case you see the outside world and dump him, my brother won't end up on the losing side. Under his coercion, I wrote the letter. He even threatened that if I ever married someone else, he'd print 1,000 copies and scatter them at my wedding. Before I went to college, I called my mom. I told her I got into a good school, hoping for some praise. But she cursed at me harshly, saying how I'd left her, and I was the bane of her existence, telling me never to bother her again. After that, I never saw her. I planned to apply for student loans for college, but Luke went ahead and paid my tuition, slipping me a card. I worked part-time to earn money, but he fired me without notice. Feeling wronged and upset, I said, Luke, I don't want to be a burden. He held my face and seriously said, Linda, you're never a burden. If it weren't for you, I'd probably just drift along. Now, I want to work hard to match you and give us a better future. I promised I'd take care of you. You're a student. Focus on your studies, and leave the money matters to me. Those times were really hard on him. He and Charles, with no background or education, rented a small place near our school. He started working on construction sites doing renovations, saying his dad used to do it, and he learned from him. Later, he started learning interior design and drafting plans. Every day he came home covered in dust. The first thing he did was shower. After dinner, he'd sit by the computer drawing plans. I touched the growing calluses on his hands and cried, heart aching, "Luke, I don't want to see you this tired." He mischievously picked me up and threw me onto the bed, as if he had endless energy every day. I leaned softly in his arms when he took a box from the nightstand. Inside was a magnolia hairpin, the one I couldn't bring myself to buy while shopping. $500. It was really pricey. "Luke, I actually don't like it that much. You should return it. It's too expensive." He casually ruffled my hair, saying, "It's not expensive at all. When I have money, I'll spend 500 million on my Linda." He said I looked stunning wearing a cheongsam with my hair up. I'd hold his hand, boldly introducing him to my classmates, telling them he was my boyfriend. Despite the gossip and whispers, I never cared about those looks and idle words. He asked, "Do I embarrass you?" I countered, "Definitely not. None of their boyfriends are as good looking as mine." A degree doesn't define ability. Never underestimate a young man for his poverty. I never thought less of him. He didn't attend college, but put one through it, and that's something to be proud of. He hugged me, planting a firm kiss on my forehead, and promised, "When I make it big, I'll drive a luxury car to your school to pick you up and make all your classmates jealous." Later on, he really did make some money. About more than a year later, he became a small contractor, leading workers and taking jobs. His dad had left him some money, and he started working on crane businesses on construction sites. Gradually, he earned a sizable income. In my junior year, he bought a Cadillac, and often picked me up from school. I'd always tease him about how well it matched his contractor vibe. In my senior year, he took on a big project and planned further ahead. He registered a company, investing funds into more promising areas. The hard-working dreamer eventually achieved his wishes. I was happy for him and us. That year, with the extra money he had, he bought a small house. He held me and said he wanted to give me a home. He also promised to get a bigger house and luxury car in the future, giving me a lavish life. At that time, it was still a bare shell, 85 square meters, 2 bedrooms, and a living room, but standing there, I could envision our future home. I excitedly described how the new place should look, and he noted down each detail, saying he'd decorated himself. He remembered everything, but I broke my promise. The nightstand still had our photo. I was leaning in his embrace, flashing a cheesy peace sign with a bright and innocent smile, while he looked down at me fondly, his lips in a tender smile. His clothes hung in the closet, blends with mine, giving it a black and white vibe of contrast. 5 years, like a fleeting dream. Everything has changed. I stared into the warmth of the room, lost in thought. Luke came back late, unlocking the door at the crack of dawn. He reeked of alcohol, his bloodshot eyes staring at me. It sent a shiver down my spine. "Linda, why did you disappear all of a sudden 5 years ago? I never believed what you said back then." He took off his suit jacket, and stood in front of me, looking down at me. I choked up, not knowing how to start, just shaking my head in bewilderment. "Luke, it's all in the past. No need to bring it up again." He suddenly yelled, "It's not in the past. It'll never be in the past." He grabbed my arm, pointing at the scar. "Tell me, who burned you with this scar?" "Eric." His Adam's apple bobbed, and he let out a sarcastic laugh. "Linda, being someone's stand-in, playing stepmother. Have you been happy these past 5 years?" Unspoken pain surged from the depths of my heart, and I lowered my head powerlessly. I never married Eric. He never hurt me. It's just business. I'm begging you, please keep the peace." His hands tightly gripped my shoulders, eyes locked onto mine, carrying a bit of bitterness as he spoke. "Then tell me why. Why did you leave without a word?" I looked at his reddened eyes, shaking my head and crying, a dull ache in my heart. "No point in dwelling on it, Luke. We can't go back. We just can't." "Why can't we? I've been stuck here metaphorically, waiting for you for 5 years. About to drown in memories." His eyes swirled with tempestuous emotions, his scarlet eyes staring at me, voice hoarse and choked. "I never got a girlfriend. Wendy was just a business thing. I only wanted to save face. Linda, I've been waiting for you all this time." His face was pale, his shoulders trembled slightly. "I never doubted your feelings for me. I know you wouldn't break up with me because I'm poor. I just don't understand why you left without explaining. I couldn't find you, even reported it to the police. only to find out you went abroad with someone. His fingers brushed over the scar on my arm, tears of pain falling from his eyes. Linda, how did you get this scar? I opened my mouth, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. Luke, I was sick, really sick for a long time, but eventually, I got better. I fell to the ground, holding my legs, gasping between sobs. But I don't have the courage to reveal the scar. I'm scared. Extreme fear, suffocation, a sense of panic overwhelmed me. I stumbled out of that room, terrified that I'd lose it in front of him the next second. At home, I shakily dug out a bottle of pills and swallowed them. Collapsing on the ground, catching my breath, Eric and Tim rushed over the moment they heard. Tim, go hug your mom, Eric gently told Tim. Tim quickly ran over, his small body hugging me. Mom, don't be scared, I'll protect you. His tiny hand patted my back slowly. Finally, I began to calm down. Linda, you haven't taken your meds in a while. Eric looked at me. I went to see Luke. Eric sighed softly. Maybe you'll find someone better. I shook my head. I won't. I know that. There's no one in this world who matches up to him. You know it too, Eric. You won't find anyone better than Susan. We're all just people trapped inside a symbolic fortress. He told me he'd been waiting for me all this time, never doubted my love for him. I almost wish he'd found another woman through those years. Maybe then I wouldn't feel so guilty. This way, I feel even less deserving of him. Eric came to me, looking earnestly. Linda, you did nothing wrong. Victims aren't guilty. It's been 5 years. Tim's healed, and it's time for you to move on too. Linda, he still loves you. What are you afraid of? What am I afraid of? I'm afraid of the nightmare from 5 years ago that nearly drove me insane. The day before graduation, I was at a school book donation event, handling corporate guests, and the corporate leader turned out to be Howard. He was like a snake with venom, emitting a determined gleam. That day, he dragged me into a car. When I woke up, I was at his place. He recorded videos and played them for me over and over. Didn't you like to record videos? This time, I'll record for you. Sweetheart, see how beautiful you are. Terrified, I snatched the phone to call the police. He sneered. I'll call them for you. The cops came and asked how I was assaulted, how to prove it. I said there was a video. They said I looked like I was enjoying it. In the end, the officers, just as before, walked away respectfully. Afterwards, Howard locked me up and tortured me like a maniac. I heard you have a boyfriend named Luke, right? Just started a business, a nobody. Linda, believe I could ruin him tomorrow. He used the video to threaten me. Or I could send this to him, let him listen to your voice. Break up with him, obediently stay with me. I can give you everything. I refused, and he put a burning cigarette on my arm. 3 days later, I had severe stomach pain and bled profusely. Was rushed to the hospital. The doctor said I was 6 weeks pregnant, but miscarried. Emotional collapse reached its peak. I could bear it no longer. I ran to the rooftop, thinking about jumping off. And that's when a tiny hand clutched my coat, calling me, Mommy, in a soft voice. I turned to look at him in a daze. He hugged me, crying, Mommy, don't go. That child was Tim. That day, Eric saved me. Later, I found out I resembled Tim's birth mother Susan, who died in an accident half a year prior. Tim developed autism and stopped talking. That day, he mistook me for his mom. Eric took us abroad, sought many doctors. I've struggled with severe depression and phobias, breaking down countless times and contemplating death. But it was Tim, little by little, who pulled me back every time. He lost his mom, and I lost my baby. The two of us, both struggling, found solace in each other and slowly healed. Thankfully, over the years, things have been getting better for both of us. As for Eric, he misses his late wife. Even though I look like Susan, if you truly love someone, you won't go looking for substitutes. That night, after putting Tim to sleep, I did a lot of thinking about everything that's happened over the years, including that nightmare from 5 years ago. In his sleep, Tim suddenly reached out and grabbed my finger. Not asleep yet, I whispered. He blinked at me. Later, I figured out you aren't my biological mom, and you don't love my dad, but you're the best person in the world. I want you to stay my mom always and not let bad guys bully you. Mom, I've grown up, and I'm brave enough to protect you now, too. I couldn't help but get a bit teary, patting his hair. Tim, thank you. Mom needs to be braver too. The next day, I went to see Eric. I needed his help. There's a business dinner this week, and Howard's name is on the guest list. Eric and I attended together and ran into him. Despite mentally preparing countless times, I couldn't help but shake all over seeing that face from a nightmare. His cold eyes swept over me. Eric's wife is truly stunning. Before long, he cornered me in a deserted spot, like a hunter with no escape. After all this running, you finally showed up. Howard, I won't fear you anymore, I replied with gritted teeth. You think Eric can protect you? He sneered. I still have some of our memories. I don't mind sharing them with him. He moved closer, like a snake. No, I trembled, fighting the terror. That's right, be good, he said, letting his icy fingers glide over my cheek. Come find me here in a bit, and we'll catch up. He stuffed a key card into my pocket. Standing outside the door with the card, a tidal wave of boundless fear and suffocation hit me. I gripped my wrist tightly, telling myself, Linda, you have to get through this. Shaking, I took out my phone and dialed a number embedded in my memory. Luke, I'm sorry. It's not that I ever thought you weren't good enough for me. It's that I'm not good enough for you. The day before graduation, my stepfather kidnapped me, assaulted me, and filmed it. And we lost our baby. I felt too dirty, too scared he'd send that video to you or our classmates. Scared it would ruin everything you worked for those 4 years. I got sick, screamed like a lunatic, broke down, and tried to end it all. I hid for 5 years, never having the courage to tell you. I'm sorry. I hung up, texted Eric, call the police. I slipped my phone partly into my bag and unlocked the door. Howard, didn't you want to catch up? This time, I wasn't afraid and met his gaze directly. You should remember you groped me more than once when I was 18. No, I wasn't even 18 yet. At 22, you drugged, raped, and illegally detained me, causing severe mental illness. These are crimes, you know that. His cold eyes and sinister laugh were like a devil's as he asked, so what? You think a video counts as evidence? Why didn't the police act back then? They took my money, of course they'd listen to me. His hand crawled up my wrist, tapping the scar he left with a cigarette burn. I've kept that video safe, so you'd better listen. I chuckled dismissively, but you miscalculated your plans. I'm not the naive Linda from 10 years ago. Nor am I the despairing Linda from 5 years ago. I'm not afraid of you leaking the video. I never did anything wrong. You're the dirty one, not me. I believe in law and justice. Howard, you should have been in jail long ago. He couldn't help but laugh. So you grew some guts over 5 years. Forgotten, huh? I regret not finishing you 10 years ago. Now what kind of tricks have you got? Another video. His mocking smile made my blood boil. Yeah, my phone's recording, I said coldly. He sneered, reaching for my phone. You haven't learned much over the years, huh? We'll make more videos later. I calmly replied, I did learn a bit. It's not a recording, it's a live stream. I even bought views, just for you. Famous businessman Howard. Consider it a gift. Also, the police are on their way. This time, I wasn't backing down. Young, I once thought that video hung over me like a mirror, a constant reminder of my shame. But I finally understood. I'm the victim here. I'm not wrong. I will turn the pain I've suffered into a weapon against the darkness, fearlessly. When the police busted in, Luke was with them. He furiously kicked Howard to the ground, punching him hard. Mr. Luke, calm down. The law will take care of him. Even a few officers couldn't hold him back. Finally, they turned to me. Miss Linda, could you calm him down? All energy seemed to drain from me, and I fell to the floor weakly. Luke. I called his name. Luke, can you come and hold me? He paused, releasing Howard in defeat. He wrapped me tightly in his arms, and we both broke down in tears. After Howard's arrest, the police launched a special investigation. He was involved in too many shady dealings. His business was huge, with lots of murky areas. People had been watching him for a long time. This incident acted as a catalyst, uprooting this tree of evil entirely. The lawyer said he was involved in serious financial crimes. With multiple charges stacked up, he'd spend the rest of his life in prison. The nightmare finally went away. Later, Charles came to me. First, he sincerely apologized. Don't take my past words to heart. I misunderstood you back then. It's fine if you want to take it out on me. I just shrugged it off. Then he hesitated a bit and said, Can you go see my brother? What happened to him? Charles sighed helplessly. He's not doing well. It's the guilt. He can't forgive himself. 5 years ago, the day you got in trouble, he planned to pick you up from school, but he got caught up preparing to propose to you, so he didn't make it. He was actually planning to pop the question on your graduation day. He's been asking himself ever since, if he hadn't picked you up that day, if that's why you got upset and broke it off. I was stunned. He was going to propose. We were so close to happiness, just one step away. He did nothing wrong, I muttered. Charles's gaze shifted. You didn't do anything wrong either. Everyone's behind you. You've been so brave. He loves you so much. Why would he care about all that? And anyway, it's not your shame to bear. He only hurts because of the pain you've suffered and hates himself for not protecting you. Then Charles pulled out a paper from his pocket and handed it to me. Isn't it time to keep your promise? I realized it was the promise note Charles forced me to write back then. I, Linda, promised to marry Luke after graduation and never back out. He had chosen me, against all odds back then, and yet, I let him down. Let the past be the past. You both need to move forward. Holding the yellowed paper, I knocked on that small house's door. He looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot. Linda, he stammered, taken aback for a moment. His voice was hoarse. I couldn't help but feel tears welling up, a bittersweet ache in my heart. Luke, I'm homeless now. Will you take me in? I cried as I looked at him. His shoulders trembled slightly, his eyes reddening, as he pulled me into his arms with a choked voice. I'm sorry, Linda, I'm sorry. I was useless. I couldn't protect you. It's all in the past, Luke. I came today to keep my promise. I placed the childish handwritten note in his hands, meeting his gaze. Luke, do you still want to marry me? I asked, my throat tightening, taking a deep breath. If you don't want to, I won't consider it breaking my word. He hugged me tightly and said, of course I do. How could I not? I've waited so long. You have no idea how much I've wanted to marry you. After 5 long years, our 2 hearts finally found refuge in that small house. Resting in his arms, I had the most peaceful sleep in years. Morning sunlight poured through the window onto the bed. Half awake, I got up to find someone already busy in the kitchen, heavenly scents wafting through the air. For a moment, it felt like I had gone back to those days long past. The wardrobe now had some new clothes he'd picked out for me. I chose an emerald chapeau, gently twisting my long hair into a bun. He came up behind me at some point and embraced me. He adorned my hair with the phoenix hairpin from the auction. Luke, it's too expensive, too flashy. I couldn't help but tease. He gently kissed my forehead. You look beautiful. I'll always keep my promises to you. He took me to his company, where there was a media interview that day. His fingers intertwined with mine, leading me in front of the cameras. I reminded him, Luke, I'm pretty famous now. Maybe you shouldn't. Before I could finish, he smiled into the camera. This is my wife, Linda, he said when I had introduced him confidently to my classmates. Ignoring all the eyes and whispers, he secretly vowed he'd one day hold my hand and tell the world, this is the one I love. That day, the evening breeze was gentle and the sunset was stunning, as he held my hand while walking down the street at dusk. I always thought that after the sunsets, time would wash away everything, making the past irretrievable. Until now, I finally understood. True, the sea is vast, but time will never change my love for you.